Hey, welcome back to Osania Zoo. Welcome back to the channel. And today we are leaving behind the safety of African savannas and we're going to jump on into the Congo rainforest, and more specifically the start of a 2-episode mega project that is going to be the first combined Madagascar area that I have ever built in Planet Zoo ever. Really excited. However, before we can get onto that, we are going to need to set up our entry, and a lot of this will make a lot more sense at the end of the episode, so I will join you back then to go into it more. But for now, let's go. So we're going to start off today with a few holes. The first one is a hole going directly into the side of the cliff face at the side of the zoo, and then we're going to dig down from above and we're going to make ourselves a wonderful vertical hole, and we are essentially going to make a nice cave system. We're going to do this in a few ways, by joining up our giant vertical hole with our horizontal path. Hopefully you've all been following along so far. And then we're going to do a little bit of tidying up in the main cave system using our chisel tool there, just to make it look like I hadn't slipped with the terrain tool and accidentally made a hole in the middle of the map. Now, today's entry is a small variant of what we're going to need to do next time. However, we are going to set out our paths just to make sure. So we're starting off by having our path go along what is essentially going to be the lower half of the cave system. It's going to come up, it's going to come around, and then it will pop out again in the upper half of the cave system, leading through to next week's episode. Around the bottom, we're going to make a little pool, a little lake. We're going to have our little rock pools, basically all the rainwater that comes in and gets captured and held down here. And we're going to line most of that up with the desert rocks. Now, I wanted to get away from the idea that we may have to put rocks on every wall. And as you'll see towards the end, we still do put quite a lot of rock work in. However, I want to use the texture tools pretty much as much as possible, because otherwise we'll end up with a huge amount of rocks on the walls, but equally it would have taken 5 to 6 times as long, and this was already a ridiculously long build for what it was. Now, right from the get-go, I had planned to use almost exclusively the stalactites and stalagmites, and I said them right first time. I get bonus points for that. However, I also noticed, as you can probably see, they've got this weird glossy sheen to them, which is a bit of a pain, because I don't want plastic stalactites. So we've not used them quite as much as I wanted to, but actually in hindsight at the end, I don't necessarily think more would have been better. In addition, this type of cave system doesn't necessarily need as many. Where would this water wear from? There's not a whole lot of water coming from above. It's mainly falling down through the giant cave opening. We are also, however, going to use the stalagmites to cover over some of the pre-built exhibit items. Unfortunately, today's animals both belong in a walkthrough exhibit. Unlike the butterflies, you can't turn off most of their enrichment items. That means we've got these ugly metal poles and metal structures just dotted around that we can't really do much with. So what we're doing is we're going to cover them over with the stalagmites. We're going to attach so the ropes essentially are hooked into the rock. And we're going to use this certainly on this lower section to make sure that most of the enrichment items look like they are built out of what would essentially be faux rock. Because again, if you remember from our first episode, this entire zoo is pretty much man-made. Once we've got all our rock work done, at least in this lower section, we're going to jump onto planting and decoration. Now, I've speckled some mossy rocks about, and then we're going to go over with the pig face to give it a nice dark green colour, which is basically standing in for our normal peppering of buffalo grass. Afterwards, we're going to jump up and start doing some directional lighting, and as you'll occasionally see, there is quite a bit of lens flare that comes down due to a glitch in the way the lighting system works. Had to get around that, and I'll go into a little bit how later on. So if you haven't caught on by now, we are indeed building for the Egyptian fruit bat, and probably less obviously also the flying foxes. I wanted to get both of them in. The foxes will inhabit the upper half of the cave system, and the Egyptian fruit bat will be in the lower half. However, what we don't want them doing is getting into all the stairwells. So we're going to pop a couple of doors, both at the bottom and top of the paths, just to stop them getting past. They are in exhibits, but you know, we've got to add a little bit of realism there, haven't we? With the doors added in, we're also going to pop down some very basic rope fences. These are just stop people falling into the caves or falling into the water, and also walking off and getting lost. Love the new Zookeeper Pack ropes. They work really well, nice and thin, and they've got these wonderful little connector pieces, which I am also a big fan of. Now with that, I took a little bit of a step back. We had a bit of a fly around, and I liked most of it, but the area that was coming down from above didn't look right. It looked too fake with the blue lights and all of those added in. So what I did is I took some time and I rebuilt it. And as you can see, it looks a lot more natural with those stacked up mossy rocks just right underneath the sunlight coming from above. And also it kind of helped with the lens flare. And again, I'll go into how we fix that later on. While I was finishing up in the lower half, I also thought I'd take the opportunity just to decorate up some of the pathway walking in. Again, we're not going to do too much with the outside for that. We'll do that when we get round to the outer habitats just in front of this cave, but it just decorates up the entrance. I took a few moments also just to add some detailing to the lights, as these were fairly important. And also we've made this cut through so that the people going up the ramp could look down back towards the bats, and also the people below could see that there was a reason to go through the door and head upwards. And we're just going to cover that in some netting, just again stop the bats getting in there. Jumping upstairs, however, we're now going to start putting together our metal bridge. And this is going to be how the guests cross from one side of the cavern to the other. We've essentially got our path here, and we're going to put underneath that a metal girder system. And we're going to dye that a dust red so that it blends really nicely in with that sort of old-fashioned industrial theme. We're going to make a frame, put in some metal to cover over all the bits that we don't want to see from below. And we are also hiding a couple of our spotlights in here. Don't worry, they work, they shine through objects because yay, Planet Zoo. For the top of our path, we want it to feel like a metal walkway. So we're going to achieve that by bringing in the vents and, like we have before, making them into a floor. So we're going to stretch them out, put them together, decorate them up with some European marquee beams. And then once we've got a copyable template, we can run that all the way down the path and along. Now we're having to sit this a little bit high because we want it to cover the curbs, and obviously because we're in the air, there is no way of turning off the curbs, which is unfortunate, but it looks alright in the end. Outside of that main bridge, we're also going to run the girders down the edges of our ramp path just to hide those curbs as well. Back in the main cavern, we're going to cover the rest of the metal floor that's not part of the walkway with rock so that the flying foxes look like they are built into the side of the cave wall. Once complete, we're going to jump on to doing our rock work, and this probably took the most amount of time in the entire build. A lot of the inspiration photos that I used for this were showing a very geometric sort of pattern in the way that the rocks arc down towards the bottom of the cavern. A lot of that's caused by the way the water falls in, and the best rock to start off with that was actually the faux rock, which has a fairly hexagonal piece that we're using here. We're also going to use some of the flatter pieces as well, and we're just basically going to sink them into the wall all the way around the cavern and build them up and undulate all the way along. It took a while, but it wasn't too bad. I popped a film on and worked my way through while popping these in. I also wanted a few ledges in certain areas to look fairly well grown and green. After all, we are getting closer to the sunlight here. So I'm also going to mix in a couple of the dynamic mossy rocks like we have at the bottom of the cave, just to add that little bit of green. And it'll also give us areas and platforms to be able to put plants on later on. Now at this point in the video, if you found any of it entertaining or informative, please consider giving it a like. It really helps the video get shared with everybody else. I don't believe now in asking for your subscription right at the start, but if you've not already subscribed, consider subscribing so you can see more. Hopefully you've enjoyed the episode so far and you're really excited to see what comes next. I most certainly am, and I would love for you to join us on that journey. Now with the rock work complete, we can start putting in some supports. These are going to hold up those items that we can't remove from the walkthrough exhibit, so they're just going to get some metal poles. And then we're going to jump outside and put together a metal walkway. Now, the way that I got around the lens flare issue with the lighting in the game was we've had to put down more lights than I would like, and we're actually using a floodlight to provide fake sunlight. The problem with that is the floodlights are absolutely huge and nothing else has quite the spread that the floodlight does. So it's kind of here to stay. So what we're going to do is we're going to build ourselves a couple of metal walkways that can run from one edge of the cavern to the other and would normally be used in reality for the keepers to access the upper areas and also potentially to do demonstrations of feeding and educational talks to the guests. For that, we're going to build a very narrow walkway because we don't need to put a path onto these, and these are going to sit just at the right height for the lighting to hang off the bottom of. To do this, I've created this modular walkway that we can copy and paste and run from one side to the other. And we're going to sit it just at the right height so that the spotlights sit to the bottom of it and look like they're attached on. Equally, higher up, as you'll see in the end cinematics, we've done the same with the floodlight. That combined means that when you look up, it's got this wonderful industrial theme. It suits very nicely in line with our metal walkway that we have further down. And it also adds a little bit of detail, so you're not just looking up an empty hole in the ground. Once we've got all the walkways in place, we're going to belt them into the rock using the new Zookeeper cables and our wonderful LED caps that we've been using pretty much at every episode at this point. We're also going to put them on both sides, one on the walkway to attach it and one sinking it into the rock. To allow our keepers to get up to these walkways, we're going to create a ladder using some hinges, which work really well. And then we're just going to extend that up until it meets the right height, build it a little safety platform so they don't fall off, and then finish it all off by putting a cage around the ladder, again, because we are working at heights here, and health and safety is very important at Osania Zoo. Speaking of safety, I think we also need a bit of a railing on our platform here so that the guests don't fall to their death. So what we're going to do is use the Zookeeper pole, which again, for my liking, is still a bit too thick, but I think works really well in this context, i.e. the context it was made for. We're also going to clad the side of our bridge in with some metal as well, just so that that metal aluminium colour is carried down the whole side of the bridge. A little bit of detailing using the rope and also just stops any kids going too close to the edge. And then we're going to finish it off with capping these little lights onto the edges of the poles, and they're just going to give a nice little ambient glow. Off camera, I also go around and put in some lighting into the floor. This just gives, again, a little bit more ambient glow, but also stops certain areas looking really dark. This high up, even though the floodlight is throwing some light onto it, it's really only benefiting the lower part of the cave, so all the lighting up this side is really handled by these little lights. Now as we near completion here, we are going to just plant out the top of our giant cave entrance. You're never really going to see this, even from above, it's too high, it's much higher than our zoo sits. However, you will see it from below, so we're just going to put in some of the plants that we've used elsewhere in the zoo. Just going to have them slightly angle in so that as you look at it from below, they cloud in that entrance. As you can see there, it just tidies it all up and adds a little bit of visual interest. Plant wise, we're also going to bring back the creosote bush, as this is going to give us little pops of green, and we're going to sink that into the rocks and ledges just to add a little bit of colour and a little bit of vegetation. Again, this high up nearer the surface, you would find that rain catches, gets grabbed, and these can really sort of live just off the water that occasionally falls into the top of these caves. I did want to keep the planting relatively sparse. We don't want this to be where you look. Really, you'd be looking at the bats and at the foxes, but we also didn't want it too plain. And it also helps us hide all those little gaps where the rocks haven't quite met up. Down below, we're going to add a couple of dead trees. Whilst these will not be used by the exhibit animals, unfortunately, in reality, they would form somewhere that certainly the flying foxes could roost. Flying foxes normally live in the rainforest. They don't necessarily live in caves, although they have been known to. This just provides an opportunity to look like the zoo is providing them somewhere to nest. But again, exhibit animals, unfortunately, won't use them. For some final planting, we're just going to pop a couple of the Bedelia leaves around. Again, these are one of my favourite weeds. Not quite as good as the nettle still reigns supreme, but they are a great way of adding very dark green weeds with fairly nondescript leaves. Down in the bottom of the cave, it felt like it needed something to drag your eye upwards, so I've put one of these marula trees in. This catches the light from the spotlights, it can be seen from both levels, and adds a nice focal point. And then we've just finished off with a couple of hostas. Again, that dark green colour working really well for the cave area. Now once the planting had been completed, one final thing just to implement was a net over the entire top of the cave. I'm going to use the Osania netting for that with its wonderful droopy centre, but just to make sure it's got something to hold on to, we're going to use the Zookeeper rope, which fits wonderfully from corner to corner, and that will be nice and tight, so that will be where the netting is hung from. And we're going to make a stretchable object like we have there, and we're just going to move it all the way across the hole, and with that we're pretty much sorted, as you can see from below. It just breaks up and adds a little bit of detailing. So, let's see how it turned out. Such a wonderful atmospheric result. I was so happy with this. I'm glad I went back and played about with the lighting, played about with the setup. We've moved away from that really fake blue-green lighting and we're now into something a lot more natural. It gives you a wonderful view of all of this surroundings. And when you consider that this is really only for 2 walkthrough exhibit boxes, I forget that they're an exhibit animal as you walk through this habitat. Now this is part one of a 2-part project. The next part is going to be a lot more man-made, but is going to be for the Madagascan, mainly all of the lemurs and monkeys that live there. And as I'm recording this voiceover, I'm already raring to go to make a start on that. So keep your eyes peeled because that will not be long behind. We also have a glut of new content coming to the channel fairly soon, with the first one being Planet Coaster 2, just getting that all tidied up and ready for you. Can't wait to see where we go with that as well. If you've enjoyed the episode today and would like to see more, don't forget to subscribe if you're not subscribed. If you want to help me out, click that like button down below and leave me a comment of how you felt this build went, or even just to throw me a quick hi, all for the sake of engagement, and I will see you next time. Goodbye.